Right now.
Hey, I'm sorry to do this on the air, but can you move your camera to your left?
Why don't I just move?
There you go. Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you can always text me, or, you can do
Every time I text you,
you can do whatever.
I usually get a message back that's like, if you.
That's an auto response.
Oh, well, okay. I should have realized that.
We welcome to the show for the first time. I had a brief experience meeting him that I did not remember that Adam reminded me of. I was all in the zone of watching the Bulldogs whoop up on the Tennessee Volunteers at the time that we met, but I did briefly meet him at a tailgate. His name is Senator Adam Lowe, and he joins us in studio to talk about aspects of the General Assembly and the previous special session and things going on in the state, national news, and just general conversation. Senator, good to have you in.
It's glad to be in here.
I'm happy to have
nice. Is this real leather?
Yeah, that's pleather.
Who's the most famous person to have sat in this chair?
A lot of Scott Sapicki. A lot of Nagas.
Pat Boone.
A lot of Pat Boone.
I'm sober already.
Actually, hold on. Pat Boone did sit in that chair.
Did he really?
Yeah. That's.
Well, you know the story with Dean Martin. Like he said when he shook hands with Pat Boone, his whole right side sobered up. Did you ever hear that? Hear that story?
The best story. What did he tell about Queen? He told a story about Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah. I can't remember what that is.
He got to meet Queen. No, I remember what it was. He said the second time, Pat Boone told the story on our radio, on my show. The second time he met Queen Elizabeth, he was in the receiving line and he's walking up, and this later on in his career, and he did the thing and he shook her hand and he said, "It's just an absolute honor to meet you." And she said, "Well, we've met before."
Kind of like you and I. It's
Wait,
what, that came full circle real fast.
You're Pat Boone and I'm Queen Elizabeth.
You're Pat Boone.
I know, I'm Pat Boone. You're Queen Elizabeth. Yeah, because he said he didn't remember meeting, and the Queen of England had to remind him that they had met previously.
Yeah, that's a little embarrassing.
That's pretty cool,
but that just shows you the depth of celebrity that you have, that the Queen of England recollects her interaction.
Well, I'll say this, that it was a sobering moment for me, and it always is, because I'm just a knucklehead with the radio show, right? Mm-hmm. But when you get an opportunity to sit down with people like Pat Boone, who's in his mid-90s, his mind is still as sharp as ever. He's got a memory. He's got all of these stories. And you realize that I'm sitting in front of someone that around 1954 was the most famous person on the planet. Pat Boone in 1954 was the most famous person on earth. Right before Elvis and right before some of that other stuff, went in another direction. He was still incredible. He's obviously been incredibly famous. You're like, wow, that's got to be something. And
now it's like Mr. Beast. right. Things have changed so much. It's in a very brief amount of time.
Now it's libs of TikTok.
Yeah,
give me a little of your backstory. Tell me where you're from and what led you into politics.
Well, it all began with a little twinkle in my father's eye.
Yeah, I bet it did.
Yeah, we won't go that far back. I served in local government in Southeast Tennessee and took a little time off. The voters gave me some time off, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. I ran for an open seat for the House back in 2014. That didn't work out. And it kind of boiled around this time, and Mike Bell, who's real popular back our way, was a senator, decided to retire from office, very, very well liked, and wanted to kind of continue what he had done in his capacity. Again, very well loved back in our district, and it gave us an opportunity to kind of step forward and say, let's try to be like Mike.
Mm-hmm.
We're from that era. We remember that tune.
What zone? What region do you represent?
Southeast Tennessee, north of Chattanooga, the toupee of Chattanooga. If you look at it county-wise, it's Bradley County, McMinn County, Meigs County, and Ray counties. So city center, Dayton, Athens, Decatur, Cleveland.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And you've one term? 2 terms?
I'm 2 years into my first term.
Yeah? How's it been so far?
Glorious 2 years. Well, from what I understand, the last 2 years have not been a typical window of General Assembly magic. It has been rather unique. And so I have 2 opinions about it. One is a senator, which is quite frustrating at moments because I'm very policy driven. But as an observer, as a student of the setting that I'm kind of plopped into, it's been highly entertaining.
Well, y'all are boring over there in the Senate.
Not all of us.
Okay, sure. Occasionally you get a nice fire emoji.
Well, we're not theatrical.
You see
we're
what
not
I did there,
dramatic.
Bell saw what I did. You saw it? Fire emoji? You got it. Yeah,
Fire
see,
emoji.
Adam's just getting right by it. Fire
Yeah,
emoji. Randy McNally. Fire emoji. Come on.
Know.
Yeah, okay.
I know. Randy likes the emojis. I'm not an emoji guy. I'm more of a meme guy.
You're not an Instagram guy?
I like the quotes from Tombstone. I like to drop those on people.
Well,
pretty
bye.
regularly.
You know,
Yeah,
that
well,
kind of
bye's a good one.
Yeah.
Or I know, let's have a spelling contest. That's a good one. That's one of my favorites.
I'm your
Or the
huckleberry.
Shaq shimmy. Do we remember the Shaq shimmy meme where it's just Shaquille O'Neal?
Yeah, I do.
shimmying
No,
a
that's
little
been replaced with the Trump floss.
bit? Oh yeah, the Trump floss is good. Anything it's the exit the room meme, right?
Sure.
I'm out.
Sure.
You know.
Drop the mic and see you later.
My new exit line is let me get my shoes.
Okay. Yeah,
That's
I'll
my
dig
new
it.
exit line.
So, what about the Senate experience over the last 2 years? I mean, has it been a lot of the House stuff that has shaken things up in the General Assembly? I mean, I jokingly say you guys are boring over there. You're getting a good amount done, but
Yeah.
I mean, the House is where kind of the calamity has been. Is that fair?
Yeah, they suck all the oxygen out of the room on a regular basis. You know, we're content to let them do it. I mean,
you see the emphasis on that. The emphasis was on suck. I noticed that.
it was completely unintentional. Sorry, Cameron. No, they have drawn most of the ire and attention in the past 2 years. Even when you hear people talk about legislation, they tend to refer to the House bill number. Very rarely is it Senate bill. Very rarely does it come our direction like that. So people tend to focus on the House side of things. And I don't know if, from a mass perspective, it's because they feel a little closer to their House member since they represent fewer people.
Yeah, probably so.
And so they kind of funnel through that direction. But as far as the entertainment value, it was by all means the better chamber to have been in the past 2 years.
What? So, I mean, obviously, there are some serious matters that you guys have had to discuss and take up and consider, particularly with regard to Covenant School and the mass shooting that happened there, bringing some of that mass shooting violence close to home and a robust discussion about what to do about it. I did not, like some conservative. I mean, I don't consider myself a conservative. I'm more of a libertarian, but some conservatives were very concerned that Governor Bill Lee was open to the discussion of red flag laws. It did not concern me because I felt like I knew where the discussion was going to go. I'm not afraid of a discussion for a discussion's sake, but I felt like that Tennessee, as well as I know them in the 3 years that I've been here, that Tennessee constituents were not ready for a preemption of fundamental rights to advance the possibility of precluding one of these future type events. At the same time, you've got to consider public safety. You've got to consider, is there anything that we can do to perhaps prevent a future event like this? Give me a 50,000-foot view of where you are on all of this.
Well, you mentioned the public not being ready for a discussion. That's the side effect of a supermajority. The negative side effect is we don't have to discuss things. And take Common Core, right? Like, we just outlawed it.
Yeah.
Like, there was never any in-depth discussion about the merits of Common Core, how it falls on its merits. Like, many conservatives would have been very, very willing to engage the left and had that discussion publicly, but we never got there. So there's been kind of this culture in Tennessee, at least from the right, when you have a supermajority, you don't fall on a sword that you don't have to. You don't create drama that you don't have to. So if you don't have to talk about it too much, you don't. And that's a very politically astute, trajectory and strategy to use. But the side effect is when you get to a moment like Covenant, where you're forced to have the public debate. I mean, they're in the halls, they're yelling, they're protesting. The public is tuned into it. It becomes uncomfortable for people who've been spoiled by just shutting things down, especially when it's something so important as Second Amendment rights to conservatives in Tennessee. So I think that's what you saw. That's why the discomfort was there. And none of us in the Senate, I can only speak for kind of my microcosm of it all. None of us were ever really afraid to discuss the merits. Few know this, but my colleagues know this. I generated a 27-page political policy analysis, citations and everything for the caucus, the governor, during that time that analyzed all of the different elements of gun policy that they were considering nationwide, how it impacted public safety, all to the tune of kind of steering it back to how do we save lives, right? How do we save lives? How do we protect rights? And is there a convergence where you have to give up one for the other? There was a notion, you remember this discussion, at the time. We trade liberty for security. We heard that a lot during COVID. You know, that is a blurb of, I think, Ben Franklin or Benjamin Franklin kind of uttered at one point. And there really isn't a lot of merit in the, empirical data that suggests that we have to do those things.
Well, and this is what I said at the time, and I'll say it again now, that if you can demonstrate to me in an evidence-based way that red flag laws have worked anywhere that they've been implemented, then I'm willing to have a discussion about what the trade-off is. But until and unless you can demonstrate to me that they've worked, then I don't understand what the discussion is about, right? That was where I was always at with it, is that they simply we have not seen where they have worked in the United States of America anywhere they've been implemented. So why would I trade my gun rights for something that has not demonstrated to work anyway?
Well, we had a unique situation in Tennessee. I mean, we could have looked at the gun right situation and the red flag issue across the nation, and everybody's is a little different. Florida had one, tend to be most misused. But in Tennessee, what we discovered is we kind of already have the procedures in place to act. Like, we didn't need new laws to do the things the governor wanted to do. The governor would say openly, I don't want red flag laws. What I want is these things. People identified them as red flag laws. And you can get down in the weeds on the semantics of it all. But what we discovered is our code already allows for intervention in moments where people are starting to engage in criminal behavior. What we did not have, and what we still don't have, is a network of mental health professionals to respond accordingly. There are very specific timelines laid out in code annotated in the state of Tennessee that dictate when the trigger has started with someone, when they're to be evaluated, when a court's supposed to rule, what they're entitled to in that evaluation, that process in place. We don't have the response network to do that, so it goes undone at the very inception of it. So there were several of us during that discussion going, whoa, before we start manipulating laws around what we do with law-abiding people, which is kind of a caveat for me. I really get hung up. I'll always pass through that lens. Am I passing a law on a law-abiding person? Not a fan, normally, because it doesn't achieve the ends that we're seeking most of the time. But in this particular situation, it was really a cart before the horse kind of scenario. Like, we don't have an existing mental health network to respond to the laws we already have in place. What makes you think expanding those laws, Well, and we have now learned as much as we can, because they won't release the full, documentation. But, I think Tennessee Star has done some great work in this regard, in that the failure was on the part of the psychiatrist or psychologist involved in this case, as much as we know, not understanding the process of reporting this individual to the authorities, right? So there were already triggers in place that could have been implemented that would have potentially, we don't know, but potentially could have precluded this. I want to move on because we're limited on time. Talk to me about school choice. Okay.
I mean, were you a fan of the legislation that was before the assembly last year?
Yeah, which one?
Or this year, I guess.
Yeah, which one's the question? So what we have not had in the past year, and I'm joking, I'm pointing at the fact that there were several bills passed.
Sure there were.
None of them similar, like very diverse.
The House had like an all-encompassing, the House was something for everybody.
Yeah.
The Senate was a much more structured process by which we have this scholarship plan. It was $140 million, I think it was, something along those lines.
That's right.
Were you a fan of the Senate version, the House version, some of both? What?
Well, yeah, I had some fingers in the Senate version. There were some elements of that Senate version that were pretty important to me, i.e. open enrollment, the ability to use the scholarship from public to public institution instead of just public to private. That was unique to the Senate version. But in light of how that transpired last year, we never really had a good conversation about the merits of school choice. Like, we got way out in front on a thing called vouchers, and we had not established the case for why school choice is important. And I experienced this in my district when I went back home, and people would say, now listen, don't support those vouchers. And I would say, why? And you often could not get an answer. If I did get an answer, it was very frequently reduced to money. It was a very monetary argument. So I'll say this. in order to understand the merits of school choice, especially for Tennessee, I think it's important to understand the people involved in education, i.e. the teacher and the student. For 100 years, since John Locke and John Dewey, progressive public education has said we have to meet the needs of the whole child. And in the state of Tennessee, it's like many other states, we've established that you have a constitutional right to free public education. So we have to provide that public education. But for 100 years, what we've said...
taxpayer funded.
Taxpayer funded, yeah. For 100 years, we have progressively from, the ESEA to the American with Disabilities Act to FAPE, which is free and free access to public education, free and appropriate public education, to inclusion law, to all of these things. We've said we have to meet all of the nuanced, holistic aspects for a student. And the public schools have to do it. So public school teacher, you have to be everything to everybody.
Hold your thought for just a second. You know how this goes, right? I've got to do this.
Do it.
I'm being told that we've got to do this now or never. It's 12:54. Our guest is Senator Adam Lowe. Can you stick around for another second?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Because we're right in the midst of this conversation about school choice. I'm very excited about it. I get confused when we talk about the southeast corner because that seems the middle of the state. But I guess technically that is the southeast corner of the state.
Yeah.
Because everything else kind of goes that way.
There's only a little bit else to go
from there. I mean, you can't go more south than that. And
I border Georgia and North Carolina. Well, I guess the old district that before redistricting was right up against North Carolina. But now there's one county in between my district and North Carolina.
My favorite fun fact since I've been here, and I've been here almost 3 years now, my favorite fun fact about the state of Tennessee is, and you probably already well know this, that it is further from Memphis to Bristol than it is from Bristol to Canada.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
it's a long state.
At the same time, I can almost spit from Alabama and hit Kentucky because it's very skinny.
Well, it really is 3 states when you look at
That's what they say, right?
Culturally across the board. In fact, I used to tease Brent Taylor, the senator from Memphis, that when people would say we need to build a wall, I'd say anywhere this side of Memphis is fine with me. And but he's grown on me.
Everybody says they want to give Memphis to Arkansas and be done with it.
Yeah. But Brent Taylor has made the case for redeeming Memphis, and I'm going to support him. I like what he's doing.
You and I were discussing the idea of giving parents more options with regard to schools and the schooling, and the possibility of creating what we called a scholarship program that would give parents ultimately vouchers. And is vouchers a dirty word in this discussion? Has it become one?
It becomes myopic because people have a very specific interpretation of what that is. And I think it's important for us to note that school choice is much bigger than vouchers. School choice includes charters, magnets. School choice includes healthy public schools. And we forget this. The public offering, a healthy public offering, an effective public offering is central to school choice. Vouchers is kind of a fringe issue. It is the pill you give in very specific circumstances. So before the break, we were kind of talking about that a little bit. It's the fact that for 100 years, we've said you need to educate the whole child. Well, when you get to the whole child and you get outside of the 3 R's and you start looking at the whole child, education becomes a very nuanced, specific thing as you move from student to student. And we have dumped the responsibility of meeting every need for every student on public education for too long. And the result in Tennessee has been that our teachers are the number one burned out profession. 85% of them leaving the profession say they cannot meet the demands of students in the classroom.
In the public sector?
In the public sector. So the question becomes, what do you do about it? So we can continue to make policies and dump more and more responsibility on the public school teacher, or we can responsibly say, from a school choice perspective, big umbrella, including public education, I don't expect public school teachers to be everything to everybody. And when a student is exceptional, either social, emotional, academically, behaviorally, we're going to give the free market a shot. And in doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to say parents have the option to survey other options. And we're going to eliminate wealth as a barrier in allowing parents to survey those options.
Well, let's put it this way. Adam, if I told you that when you go back home, back in southeast Tennessee, that from now on, you don't get to pick your grocery store where you buy bread. You have one grocery store to buy bread, and everybody that lives in a district around that grocery store has to go to that grocery store to buy bread. Do you believe bread's going to be better or worse?
Listen, it's going to be whatever it is. It's going to taste the same.
Choice always. Well, no. I mean, the bread is naturally. If I'm the bread maker and I know you've got to come to me for bread, it is a natural occurrence within that system that the bread quality is either going to remain the same or go down. It's not going to get better. And we are trying to escape the natural way of things to suggest that if I have a monopoly on a system, that I can make that system better on its own. You have to insert something else within the system in order to achieve that goal. And I feel like that's and I understand that a complex set of legislation or bills like this, there's going to be something for everybody to hate. Yeah. But the overall concept for me is let's infuse something within the system that is going to insist that the system perform better.
Well, what we want to do is do what can be considered reasonable. Okay? This past year, there was a lot of toxic talking points, people spitting around, the things to incite fear. You know, the easiest way to get somebody to be against something is to stoke them with fear.
Sure.
And the left in Nashville does a really good job of that. Even some on the right do. In fact, I got so sick of the debate. We're creating another entitlement. No, we're not. We're reforming an entitlement. We're reforming it with free market principles. That used to be a conservative concept. It used to be a conservative concept that when you have options, that free market makes everything a little bit better. So what I said we need to do with school choice through a voucher program in Tennessee, we have to create opportunity to unburden our public school teachers to where they don't have to be everything to everybody. We have to take what we're going to spend $7,000 a year as a state on a student regardless. It's cost neutral to the taxpayer. Let that produce the most effective educational route, optimal educational route that makes the most responsible, impactful adult later on. And in doing all of that, we can get to the money side of things, but anybody who's been against the voucher program, they always reduce a student to how much money they're worth.
Mm-hmm. I mean, right now, I'm having an argument on the membersnutrition.com super text line. I don't understand why you blowhards, that's me and you, Adam.
Yeah, no,
okay, sure. Yeah. I don't understand why you blowhards don't get this. You can pay your own money to send your kids wherever you want. Well, isn't tax dollars, that's my money too.
Yeah, well, they're making the argument for why wealthy people shouldn't have school choice. Because that's not true if you're under a certain income level and you don't have that opportunity. So it's...
Well, and if I'm paying money, I mean, the government doesn't generate money on its own to pay for schools. That money comes from the citizens too. Mm-hmm. And the citizens ought to be able to elect representatives that are going to best execute the function of educating our children through whatever means necessary to get the best results. And if that means moving money around, then move money around.
Well, and you've stepped into a place that further evidences why we need an in-depth conversation around the merits of school choice, because there is a point in personal wealth where the argument shifts. If you're below a certain income level, wherever that line is, it's about opportunity and choice. There are people who cannot afford, unless they have a voucher program, to have the opportunities to meet the need of their autistic child or their deaf child or their behavioral needs child or where they feel their child culturally fits. Mm-hmm. They don't have that opportunity. So it is about choice at that level. But when you get to a certain income and you have a certain personal wealth, sure, you have all the opportunities in the world. The discussion shifts towards redistribution of wealth. And if you're a liberal, you believe in redistribution of wealth. You're going to argue with me all day long that that's a good thing. But if you're a conservative, you probably have fundamental problems with people who are paying into a tax pool and not getting anything out of it. You probably have fundamental issues around the redistribution.
You addressed briefly, and in the few minutes that we have left, I want to circle back to it. Because there was an argument by the same types of individuals that were arguing the entitlement thing, that this was creating government bureaucracy where there was none, and that it would ultimately create the government takeover or a dynamic by which the government would have the opportunity to take over aspects of the private education system. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that risk is already there. A new legislature can come in. Everything they're scared of, no further risk is created with any of this. If anything, the legislation in and of itself was self-limiting. It did a couple of things some of which other states had not done, which I think were very healthy limiters. One was it established that any cost or expenditure was subject to appropriation. It wasn't automatic. So your costs could not escalate unless your legislature funded it every time they funded a budget. The second thing is when they talk about that, they talk about bureaucracy run amok getting into private school. It was permissive. Didn't force anybody to do anything. In fact, I've got some legislation coming up this year that is going to further insulate what the rights of homeschool families, so they feel a little less afraid. And I'll just say, for those people out there who were stoking that fear in families, shame on you. Absolutely shame on you, because none of those things were true. You knew they weren't true, and you incited them anyway because you want people to be scared. So I'm sick of the fear. Let's have an intelligent discussion about the merits of school choice. If you disagree with those merits, fine, that's fine. Disagree on the principles and merits of it, not on the fear-mongering.
Is this topic A for the General Assembly next year?
Very likely, because it's a continuance from last assembly, and there'll be kind of some refining of what should come forward. What that looks like, clearly leadership's going to have a big influence on what the legislation looks like, what comes out of the governor's office, but it's by no means a dead topic. And there's a lot of broad public support around this, even if people don't intend to use the voucher program. When you ask them if they think people should have one, in my district, it's like 76%. Say, I think people should have the option.
I am fascinated how this subject turned in a year and a half in the state of Tennessee, because in my 25 years of doing this, school choice was always considered to be a conservative approach, giving parents more opportunity to make certain decisions about the schooling of their children. And certain so-called conservative entities tried to create this argument that it was a liberal view of how to better schools, which it just fascinates me.
Well, that's name-calling number one on the right. The worst thing you can call a conservative person's a liberal.
Right.
Or a rhino.
Right.
A rhino, yeah. And I don't like the term rhino. I've talked about this openly.
I get called a rhino all the time, although I've never identified myself as a Republican, which I always think is funny.
Well, it's a no true Scotsman. You were talking about Scotland during the break. It's a no true Scotsman fallacy.
Right.
You know, I'm a Scottishman and I wear a kilt. Well, I'm a Scottishman and I don't wear a kilt. Well, you're no Scotsman at all. It's an arbitrary measure of what someone is. And so I don't like it for that reason. And the other reason is people who fit the description of rhino tend to be the one who use the phrase the most.
Hey, Belle, how do you know that you're a real libertarian? This is what Belle and I have this running joke. How do you know you're a real libertarian?
You are not a real libertarian unless another libertarian has told you you're not a real libertarian.
That's how you know.
That's true.
That's right. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same that goes with the rhino deal, right?
But that's the worst thing you can throw at somebody is call them a liberal. But, hey, listen, school choice is in the party platform. Republican in name, it's in the Republican Party platform. It was part of 7 speeches at the convention this year. Like, it's espoused by your banner-carrying candidate right now. It's important to a lot of people. It's free market principles in the big umbrella of education. It's not going to bankrupt public education. There is zero evidence that the legislature and conservative leadership in Tennessee will not fund public education. We are $1.8 billion to the positive to public education in the past 6 years. So when you say that to the public, you're not being genuine. And that's what we saw this last year was a lot of disingenuous talking points to alarm people, to alert people, to scare teachers, to scare homeschool families, to scare whoever into compliance with resisting a thing rather than sitting down and say, listen. So when people come to me and say, don't vote for vouchers, my number one question is why?
Listen, I love the conversation. I love the opening. I love getting to know you. I love you stopping by. The next time you're suckered into Nashville by mutual friends, come on by and see us. You don't even need an invitation. Senator Adam Lowe joining us for a few good minutes. Thank you so much for the time.
You're welcome. Thanks, Matt.
It's a great conversation.